I heard you talking about how, so melanopsin is in the eye and that's what's detecting blue light, but like if the lights are on in your house above versus on the ground, it's different. It affects you differently. And this is something I didn't understand. So can you explain that to me?
Yeah, and I have these red lights on just for this particular situation, and it's during the day right now. But when I'm by myself at home, I really don't have any of this stuff on. Actually I have the breakers cut. But the way that melanopsin is structured in the eye, which melanopsin is the blue light detector, right, in our eye and tissues. Most of it is actually directly in the back of your eye and actually at the bottom of your eye.
All right, everybody. Hey, it's Dr. Rimka, and I'm with a new friend, Dr. Corey. Let me see if I say it right. Gazvini.
Absolutely.
Did I do it right? All right. He's a DOM, which a lot of you, I'm going to say this right now. I don't know if you ever get this, Corey. Are you okay if I just call you Corey? Because you can just call me Stephanie.
Yeah, please do.
I like to be casual. Where people think like there's only one type of doctor in the world. So you can have medical doctors, you can have doctors of chiropractic, you can have PhDs, doctors of philosophy, and you can have doctors of Oriental medicine. That's what the DOM stands for. We might sometimes say Chinese medical doctor. It kind of depends on where they got their degree. And he was referred to me. I'm gonna tell you where I'll just say the names. Kelly Bento sent me a message about you because we're kind of in that some of the tribes with Dr. Jack Cruz, and she goes, you need to really look at Corey. And I was like, okay, and kind of explained that you trained a lot under him and knew a tremendous amount of information about light, water, magnetism, seasonal eating, and nutrition from that. And I love that you're an acupuncturist with the Chinese herbs, certification. So let me go ahead and just tell you guys who he is and where he is in case you want to go see him and get some care. He's down in Florida. So let me just read a little bit about him. All right. So his Instagram handle is Optimal Light Doc. And that in and of itself, I think is intriguing because how many, people who are calling themselves doctor or doing anything like that talk about light. And some of you know I do, but we're going to get into it kind of deep with him. He's a doctor of Oriental medicine, and he's a licensed acupuncturist and traditional Chinese herbologist. He's nationally board certified also in biomedicine. And I do want to ask you about that, Corey, because I want to know, I do a lot of biomedicine, but I am not nationally board certified. So I want to know if I should be. He's in private practice in Tallahassee, Florida, and he's the CEO and leading clinician of Optimal Light. And Optimal Light is a health education initiative providing coaching and education to clients worldwide. So you can see him in person, but you can also talk to him virtually. He integrates ancient philosophies of the East and meets them with the modern scientific innovations of the West. All right. So let's talk about this because there's a lot of exactly what I do, but we have different backgrounds and different things that we're going to end up talking about. And so I hope to learn a lot from you today, and everybody following us can learn. So hi, thanks for joining me.
Hey Stephanie, I really appreciate the introduction and thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Yeah, you're a young one. I'm going to ask you, how old are you?
I'm 33.
Oh yeah, you're young. I'm almost 50. So you're like, you couldn't be my child, but I can tell you're very young. So let me ask, because I just am really curious, what made you, I have a lot of friends who are DOMs. I see them, I refer to them, I refer acupuncture all the time. Anybody who's watching this, if you've been a patient of mine, you know how much I love it. I love experiencing it. I love referring. I think it works very strong. It makes total sense to me in terms of I do neurofeedback, I read electrical brainwave states, I do a lot of electromagnetic medicine. And to me, that's what acupuncture is, the meridian, it's electrical, right? So, and sound and acoustics and what we really are. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But none of my friends who are acupuncturists or Chinese medical doctors know anything about light. None of them.
Unfortunate reality.
I know.
Yeah.
What made you, and you're very young, and so you've got a head start on a lot of people out here practicing. What drew you to this, to learn and to want to talk about it and teach people about it?
Realistically, my story originates around the end of my first year in acupuncture school, when I started to come to terms with the realization that my education was only going to take me so far. And what I really mean by that is that, acupuncture school is really good about teaching you how to diagnose using the philosophy, how to do acupuncture physically, but the explanation of the true mechanisms aren't really there. And ultimately, I also had to come to terms in my clinical internship as well that, doing acupuncture alone isn't going to fix everyone's problems. And the first person I realized that in was myself, because the truth is, I went to acupuncture school because I was trying to figure out how to fix myself. I had become completely cognitively diluted. My ability to withhold an attention span and to do any type of reading or to pay attention to anything complicated had been so reduced from the time that I was 21 until I was about 25, because I had been a musician and I was doing a ton of traveling and staying up a lot in a ton of blue light and rarely ever going out in the sun and being around electrical fields all the time. And I had no idea that that was affecting me. But nevertheless, I had chronic insomnia, and a lot of the bad decisions led to worse decisions. Like, I was even stupid enough to be vegan for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
And that led me down the really, really wrong path as far as my health goes. So not only could I not think properly, but my digestion was screwed up, my sleep was screwed up, and eventually I felt like was in the body of like a 70-year-old man. And after getting a ton of acupuncture treatments and treating other people during my clinical internship, I realized, when someone gets off the table, they feel fantastic and they can go back home and feel okay for several days. But if they're still making the same mistakes in their own time,
Mhm.
then they can never actually achieve optimal health, or they can never really fix their problem. And it wasn't until I started to do my own research outside of my own education in school and that curriculum was when I started to realize what the philosophies of Chinese medicine really were. Because fundamentally, you start out by learning that everything is rooted in yin and yang. And for anyone that's studied Taoism, they can actually understand that, yang is the light and that yin is the darkness. But they never really connect that philosophy with a scientific explanation, right? So I started listening to the more philosophical side originally, and they were telling me that if you watch the sun rise and spend time in the sun, that's how you're going to build yang energy in your body. And I felt like my brain wasn't working appropriately, and I couldn't get enough energy to really do what I needed to do because I had fatigue. So I started to try it, and things got a lot better, right? So I started this as a spiritual practice to sort of watch the sunrise. And it wasn't until some point along the line that researching about the sun led me to a guy named Dr. Jack Cruz. And I was blown away by the material, because here was a guy that was explaining how and why watching the sunrise actually works. And so that's when I knew that this was something I needed to look more into. So I started to really go into a deep research with the information that he's published. And I was studying like 3 or 4 hours a day just to figure out what he was really talking about, and only spending 1 or 2 hours at that time studying acupuncture and herbology. Nevertheless, I was still maintaining a level that was at the top of my class, and people were like, "How the hell are you doing this?" And I was like, "Look, it's because of the environment that I'm putting myself in. Like, you guys are in here on the computer all the time, and every chance I get, every second I can get, I'm out here in the sun." And it wasn't until I heard about blue light and started to wear protective glasses, specifically at night, that literally all of the problems that I had before started to just disappear, and they were gone forever, right? As long as I maintained that lifestyle. And it wasn't an easy path for me to convince myself of, but once I started to think better and understood how and why I was the person that made myself sick, and I caused my own environment to degrade my health, that I eventually woke up to the fact that, veganism isn't the best idea either. So that, in combination with reduction of blue light and adding the sun, my entire life was transformed. Like, I became the human that I always wanted to be, and I'm still going from there.
Yeah, that's a beautiful story. It's very similar to mine. And I think several things that people can take away from there. Obviously, well, not obviously, I'm also very strong knowing that vegan was a major mistake, and the reality of how we have to eat animal based to really have a healthy functioning brain, and how the things, the special, maybe you'll talk about it, maybe the special magic of DHA and how that works with light. When I really understood that, and it was for me from Jack Cruz as well, breaking down DHA and the special, ness of that structure, and how, we can't make it, we have to get it, and why I needed to start eating seafood, even though I didn't like it. And understanding like, okay, I'm going to try this oyster thing. And how 2 years consecutively, I ate sardines every single morning,
Awesome.
because of him. As I was healing myself, I was a vegan for 12 years. So I had a lot of recovery and repair to do.
Wow.
And watching the change in the brain performance. And so now I'm at a point in practice, I won't even accept a vegan. I just let them know, like, my job is to help heal your brain. I can't do it if you stay that way. So if you're willing to change, and I'll teach you what your brain's made of. And so I made a mistake too at times, just thinking it was just the sun. I could get away with just the sun, not really understanding how DHA is coupled with that. Do you think you could explain that a little bit to people, to explain why it's important? Because sometimes I have a really hard time getting people to get on board with the seafood part.
Sure.
Like, well, and I tried to avoid it too. I'll tell you, I did a 2-year experiment and didn't eat much of anything, because I just, grass-fed beef's got a lot of omega-3, it's got a lot of DHA. Well, the reality is salmon's got 53 times more than that. And I did the own experiment, I tried. And so now I make an effort to make sure I ingest DHA. I don't want it in the pill form for myself or my patients. I'll use it if I have to, right, in a crisis. But maybe talk about that, because that's a big thing people, I think, are missing out. And recently I interviewed Cruz, and I had an aha moment again, like, God, that's my problem. I'm keeping my DHA too low, so I'm missing out on benefits of the sun.
Yeah, it's a huge struggle when it comes to something like veganism. And I'm glad you really don't have that same problem anymore. Myself, I had to trick my own self to stop being vegan, and I did it with oysters. I was going to school in Orlando, and there's a world famous oyster bar there, Lee and Rick's. It's open since 1951. And I convinced myself to go and eat oysters because from what I had read, they don't have a central nervous system. And so there's not really like a lot of blood, and it's just sort of this still animal that doesn't have a lot of movement, which seemingly doesn't means that it doesn't have a complex emotion system. So that's how I convinced myself to go that route.
Yeah.
And
I started with shrimp. We all kind of do our thing, like, well, like,
well, yeah, I mean, what really
I
happened
tricked
was,
myself too. I did the same thing.
yeah, I went and ate a dozen oysters, and I ended up having an erection for like 24 hours after that. Yeah, so my body was like, you need to
Yeah.
actually go get more of that right away,
Yeah.
right? And so I gave up all my beliefs pretty quickly with that reaction.
Yeah.
And veganism's really, I'm not scared to say, from my own personal experience, I know that it is an eating disorder because people we allow ourselves to start to make decisions with food that are emotional based. And when you allow your emotions to control your eating habits to the point of nutrient deficiency,
Mhm.
that's a problem.
That's
And
a
as
very provocative statement, Corey. And it pauses me. But actually, like so quickly, I'm like, shit, you're right.
it
And I
is,
would never want to think of myself as having any disordered eating, but I absolutely did back then.
so this is
You know,
self-admittance,
yeah,
for
yeah.
reflection. And I want people to really look at it a lot differently in society when it comes down to it, because using the idea of a term like protein and saying that a vegan diet is sufficient in protein is idiotic, because it's not just protein is a misused word. Like, the amino acid profile is what you really need to know about when it comes down to nutrient density, and I know that from an animal source diet, like having a diet that's higher in fats can make all type of metabolic hormones and different concepts in the body that are really, really vital. But when it comes to seafood, DHA is so important to the human body. And the real reason that we know that is because of the brilliant and extensive scientific work that's been done by Michael Crawford and Stephen Cunane. And there's a heck of a book that they put together. It's like really a whole compendium of the full story of the evolution of the human brain, is what the title actually is. And in that book, they talk about rapid expansion of the brain from primates to the human being, and how the human being has the highest encephalization quotient of any other species, meaning the brain weight to body weight ratio is stupendous. Another animal that's anywhere close is the dolphin, which we know eats a ton of DHA, and they're grounded 100% of the time. So DHA is an omega-3. It's called docosahexaenoic acid, and it's the primary structural component of the human brain. So right off the bat, just knowing that, you can think to yourself, yeah, I mean, if my brain is my most important organ in my body, and I can't really synthesize the nutrient that it's built of very easily, then obviously I need to eat a ton of that. And when we live in an environment that is inflammatory to our brains, meaning a ton of artificial light, artificial food, non-native electromagnetic frequencies that are constantly bombarding its well-being, then you need to eat a ton more of that nutrient, right? And seafood itself isn't only the secret sauce. As far as DHA is concerned, it's more so a brilliant package that it comes in, right? Because I think our modern perspective, with especially being influenced by big pharma and the pharmaceutical industry as far as like supplementation and whatnot, there's not just a one single nutrient that's the secret key. When you eat seafood, it's loaded with DHA, and it's also loaded with iodine and selenium. And that package is like rocket fuel for your thyroid. And the relationship between the thyroid and brain is very close. And we have to know that that's exactly how the system really works. That's why you need those nutrients, more than any other that you can get in your diet, because we also have shown data that we're having thyroidal problems as well, and that has a close relationship to neurodegeneration. So the iodine that's in seafood is totally important, and that's why like your thyroid hormones T3, T4, that means 3 iodines there, right? And even when we live or when we associate with the animal source food paradigm, they totally got it going on. And I agree 100% with what you said about eating an animal source diet. But land source foods are completely deficient in iodine in comparison to seafood.
Yeah, I agree. It is a little bit of an issue I have, like some kind of slightly known, little whatever in the carnivore community. And it is a problem I have with long-term carnivory, which I'm like, hey, I get it. Do whatever you got to do to stay healthy. And there are some people with such severe reactions and for whatever reason, and they can't tolerate a single oxalate and or a lectin at all. Okay, fine. I don't care. And I myself, kind of eat carnivore mostly for a few years now, just because it's simple. But the kind of mantra of like just beef and water, eat steak, just beef. There's a lot of beef often, right? And I have to come in and I'm like, you guys, you really, really need seafood. Like you're really missing out on this and organs. And again, a lot of the seafood counts as organs, right? Sardines are organ meat, and oysters and stuff. So I really do align. I loved the Epipaleo prescription that Cruz wrote that really kind of set it for me. Like, all right, I have a hard time sometimes spending the money. I think some people, it's like that. Like, I don't love seafood. So, I mean, I hate salmon. I'd rather eat a steak. So to think of what I'm paying, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I don't love this whole thing. But I absolutely agree. I think it's been, and I'm going to tell you in practice, I don't know, maybe you have suggestions or people who are listening. I struggle to get parents to feed it to children. And it is a major concern of mine. That so like a whole generation is avoiding seafood as children are developing, and parents don't, because the parents don't like it or they don't cook it, or they, oh, my kid's picking, they give up after 1 or 2 tries of making salmon. I don't know if you have come up with any tricks or hacks, or if that is something you deal with in practice, but I'm still trying to figure it out, how to help people incorporate it, like, and understand they need to do it.
Yeah, it's a major problem, and the problem is a lot more prevalent than it used to be. Why do I really say that? It's because DHA is not just the most important nutrient for your brain. It's also the most important nutrient for your eyes. And when we live a lifestyle that we're chronically exposing ourselves to artificial light, that's really inflammatory for our eyes and for our brain. We need the nutrients to not only repair that, but that can offset it. Like you brought up shrimp. Shrimp is loaded with lutein and astaxanthin, which is really helpful in repairing your eyes. And you need the DHA also because all of your cell membranes are loaded with it. What is life fundamentally when it comes down to it? It's just electrons that are excited moving back down to the ground state. And there's no real way to convince anyone to do it. I mean, you just have to teach them how and why it's a necessity, and then they just have to overcome whatever beliefs that they have. I mean, it's hard because we're going against, not only are we going against the standard framework, but, like we said, even the Paleolithic framework doesn't quite understand that yet. So
Yeah.
you have to start with whatever works for you, but seafood minimum 3 times a week.
Mhm.
There's no way to avoid
Yeah. Let
that
me ask
problem.
you this question that I get asked all the time. I want to hear your answer. Well, what about heavy metals? They say not to have seafood because it's all polluted, and what they say to be mercury in the fish. So what about that?
Yeah, that's the argument that I have to face every single day of my life.
Yeah. So
So
what do you say?
yeah, seafood does contain some mercury, although you'd find that most of the seafood that you should really be eating doesn't have much at all, like shellfish and crustaceans are lower. They're only the foods that are higher up in the food chain have more mercury, like shark and tuna, really. But in all reality, I don't eat a ton of those fish. Um, Even though I still do eat them from time to time. But seafood is loaded with selenium. Selenium chelates mercury, right? So anytime I'm eating seafood, I'm not concerned about the mercury at all, even if it is tuna, for that very reason.
I'm not
Because,
either. I,
yeah,
I agree with you. I think it's been overhyped, um, and is part of potential propaganda to get people to not eat seafood. I think it's a travesty that the American Medical Association tells pregnant women to avoid eating seafood, and yet are very willing to inject them with 1,000 times the mercury level with injections, right? So I agree. I think it's been potentially potential nefarious thing around that. So I kind of fell for it for a hot minute, 10, 15 years, a long, long time ago, thinking it was an issue, and understanding the different forms of mercury, and understanding typically food, real things you eat have the cure built into it. So you always have it handled for you. So I love that you said that, because I agree. I wouldn't worry about it at all. Yeah.
yeah, and regardless of whatever the status quo's advice is, whether it's on purpose or not, uh, I like to I like to assume that everything that they're telling me is wrong, because I've found that every time that I go and fact check any of their crap, I realize that they don't have the facts more often than anyone else. So I always say, don't trust, verify. You need to start to do your own digging while you
Yes.
still can, because it might not always be available for you on the internet. It looks like a lot of that we're being limited from what we can find, but
Yeah.
luckily, if you actually spend the time, you can find the truth. Just don't do it on any mainstream website, that's for sure.
That's why I'm a fan of getting real books. I tell people, like, I would buy the books. I would have the physical things sitting in your house. I have many, many hundreds throughout rooms and in the garage and in storage, because you just don't know. And I will link you guys in the description, any of the things you end up referencing, because I haven't read that book. I'm excited. The one you mentioned about the evolution of the brain, because it is a complex story to understand how all of these things are working together, how DHA, it's more than that. Can you keep continuing with that story and bring light into it? And I'll say this one little caveat, like when you talked about veganism and how, like, saying, really a disordered eating, I always see it as the strongest representation of a disconnection from nature. That way of eating shows it's such an extreme deviation from understanding nature, the light and dark cycles, the temperature, the just how to be human and how to be connected to the earth, right? And maybe that leads you into kind of talking about that whole way of eating, how light, dark, DHA, food, how it all kind of works together, and why in season cyclical eating is how we truly thrive, and how that really is all about light information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of people like look at our ancestors, like the primates, and say, you know, well, chimpanzees or gorillas are mostly vegetarian, so I'm following their idea, right? Because they're big and strong animals, but you know, realistically, they're not. They weren't. They eat a ton of. There's insects in their diet, and then even chimpanzees, we found out that they eat marine source plants that contain a ton of little fish and little shellfish that have a ton of DHA in their natural environment. And you know, insects actually have a lot of DHA in comparison to meat and plant source as well. So you can never really get it from a supplement either, right? Because the supplemental form is in the SN1 and the SN3 position, meaning that we know that from research, SN2 type DHA is really the only kind that we can assimilate into our brain and central nervous system.
This is
So,
just the shape structure he's talking about, you guys. There's like a chemistry to it. And when things can have a different way, like a component is put onto it and it changes the way something is, the same way maybe you've seen me talk about sort of like an isotope thing where hydrogen or deuterium or tritium, it's the same but different. The weight and mass are different. So with something like DHA, there's different forms of it. And that's what he's talking about, SN1, SN2.
right. So, you know, as the most advanced life form in the entire universe, us as humans, we don't just assimilate food as our energy and information. We have multifactorial processes to where we are actually assimilating light as energy and information. And it turns out that all organisms actually do that to a degree. And the higher they are on the evolutionary chain, the more complexity that they actually have. And the light and dark cycles have existed since the beginning of life on this planet. We're talking like 4 billion years, right? So our genetic code is tied to that cyclical information. And we're always paying attention to the light that's in our environment. But when it comes to like DHA, what we know is that is the chemical that actually converts light energy into a DC electric current. And that's the electricity that our body actually runs off of, right? Because we are an electrical body. And so light is an electromagnetic wave, but when it comes and interacts with the DHA in your eyes or in your cell membranes, it becomes an electromechanical wave when it interacts also with the water in your body, right? We are mostly water when it comes down to a living cell, right? Like you say, like as far as the mass goes, we're like 70% water. But Gerald Pollack has talked about how in a living cell, the living aspect, the ratio is 99% of the molecules are water. And water is always absorbing and storing electromagnetic energy. And all physical things are essentially electromagnetism. But the difference between something that's alive and something that's not is quite obvious, right? So the more light that you can actually assimilate, the more energy and the more information that you're going to actually use to propagate success, right? To achieve optimal health and to have, you know, optimal reproduction. So how does light really interact? First of all, with the water, right? But we know from Albert Einstein's innovation, he got the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect, which means that light can only interact with electrons and other light. So light does not interact with anything but light and electrons. And what does that really mean is that when you're assimilating light, you really need to get more electrons. Why does grounding and earthing, it's the same thing, why does that work so well? Because you're absorbing electrons. That's what you're really doing, because anything that has a greater source of electrons will free flow its source into something with a lesser source of electrons. We know that from the work of Robert Applewhite, 2014. So when you're standing on the earth is loaded with electrons, they immediately start to flow straight into your body.
Yeah.
But why do dogs and cats love to be pet? Because you're a greater source of electrons, and the electrons start to flow straight into them as a lesser source.
I didn't
So
know that. You know what? That's like such an obvious thing.
everything is electromechanical.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's why like being in a waterfall, right, is or being in the ocean is very, you're getting a lot more electrons, you guys, than if you're just in your front lawn. Like
Yeah, that's
lay
definitely.
down, right? There are different places, but ultimately the earth is a giant crystal magnet that is loading, pouring out free energy for all of us all the time. The electrons, right? Yeah. Love it.
Yeah. So food essentially just gets broken down into protons and electrons. And to be able to be healthier, what we're really trying to do is get more electrons, right?
Mhm.
And it's not just getting those electrons, it's
I think we need the protons too. I mean, yeah, we need hydrogen like crazy, right? So we need, I think you need a ton of electrons and a ton of protons, right?
you do, but the ratio is totally
Yeah.
wrong when it comes to the modern way of living.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
It's,
agree.
the modern way of living is totally lacking in electrons.
Yeah.
People are never grounded to the ground, and all living forms of life, other than birds, are always grounded, right? Like
Yeah.
our evolutionary adaptation does not allow for us to wear shoes, yet we think that it's not a problem, right? And
Yeah.
another thing that you were talking about with children, when you and I grew up, our parents didn't give us a hard time about not wearing shoes, but nowadays I see people that give their kids a hard time when they want to run around in the yard without any shoes on, and that's a lot bigger problem than people want to really know.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like they don't want to take them out to you know to the state park with the lakes and let them swim around, or to the beach as often as people used to do back in the day,
Yeah.
because they have forms of entertainment that can keep them occupied inside on their TV or on their computer.
Yeah.
We didn't used to have that, right?
And I think the media has overhyped the idea of infections and pathogens as if they're the absolute demons. And so it didn't cross my mother's mind, right, about you'd become infected from running barefoot on the grass or playing. And I lived on water. There was a canal in Michigan, so Great Lakes, and we had a canal in our neighborhood. So like we were always going over there, jumping in and grabbing crawfish and things like that, and fishing and out on boats and jumping in the lakes. Now, and you can see it in the world's like paranoia over things, like they're trying to create, you're supposed to be afraid of every pathogen, dousing yourself in alcohol, never letting any, other forms of life, bacteria, parasites near your system, not understanding that we're a complex creature full of all of them and they're helping us. So I agree. And I've said for years that I think shoes are one of the worst health abominations ever created. Um, I practice in my office barefoot. I imagine you do as well when you see clients. I don't, always the same thing, encouraging, and that's here in Georgia. It's a big story. Parents will say, but there's parasites in the soil. You can't let your kids die in the grass. I'm like, are you guys kidding me right now? But that's part of the theme of be afraid of all the things. So disconnect from nature, be always close, be on concrete, make more, rip out, tear down more trees. The nature is dangerous. That's, I think, part of what's happened to us. Like nature is dangerous. Stay safe in the house on a screen, hardwired in, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah, you
an
said that so
interesting
well.
change. Yeah, that we've seen.
I 100% agree with everything that you just said. Yeah. And so realistically, like, yeah, you said that we obviously do need protons, but it's the ratio, right? And you can even think of it in terms of, acidic and alkaline, because a lot of people know that, the more acidic your body is as a whole leads to, more inflammation, right? So that's why grounding, the more electrons that you get, the more that you're reducing inflammation dramatically. Because what is the pH scale, or the acidity alkaline scale, is really a proton gradient. So, the more protons that you get, it actually becomes more acidic. The less protons, it actually becomes more alkaline. And that's the proton and electron affliction there when it comes down to it fundamentally. So
Mhm.
it's not only that aspect, but it's the fact that the light that we're exposed to is absorbing, is interacting with the electrons and filling those electrons in our eyes, and therefore our brain and our cell membranes, our entire water structure that is crystalline in nature,
So
is
why don't you
absorbed.
explain to people, are you okay if I interrupt you? Or I'll let you
Yeah,
finish, but
yeah, we're
I
cool.
think people can see, right? They're watching us on YouTube or whatever. We're both wearing glasses,
Mm-hmm.
and we're both wearing similar glasses for a similar reason. I think you've got a red panel going. I see some, maybe, unless it's a reflection, like I've got a red LED panel at my feet, and I have no clothes from the bottom down. So I'm getting a bunch of red light. We're both not outside only because of harsh weather. I don't know if you've ever seen Corey and I in the past. We're usually outside when we do this, but there's harsh weather in both places and we can't be outside. But I think you're in front of a maybe potential window or something. So why don't you explain, like, why do we look like there's a reason you're doing what you're doing? And there's a reason I'm doing what I'm doing. Why don't you explain to them, like, yep, this is a practical thing you can do, and this is why we're doing it.
Right. Yeah, I'm always outside as long as I don't have to be, like inside when I'm with a patient or something like that. But it's really, 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 really windy outside, like to the point to where it knocked my computer off the table. So I made an exception for now so the audio wouldn't be so terrible. But I am inside with the red lights on. I also have some UV bulbs on to balance out the spectrum, and the door right behind the computer is actually open. So I really have all the natural light coming in, and it wouldn't be the same if it were through glass, because glass filters out infrared, which is the most repairing, most regenerative part of the spectrum. And it also doesn't allow for any UV light to come in, which is also a problem, because then you just create a blue light out of light that's coming through glass without those other balancing parts of the spectrum. So I also have the red lights on. I have one overhead and one down here. And I'm not wearing any shoes either, and I'm actually on the tile. So I'm still grounded right here where I'm sitting. So that's something that I can always pay attention to that can actually help, so that I'm creating more of a natural environment and not divorcing myself from the connection that I'm designed to be within and be influenced by. I'm also hardline on the internet too.
Yeah,
Like, I
me
don't
too.
know how many
Yeah, I
people
use
don't.
Wi-Fi. I use it just an Ethernet cable. So these are like these things people are like, oh, how do I do it? I'm like, you can start simple. You can buy blue blocking glasses. You can, book a consult with him, book a consult with me, start devouring information, understand what are we talking about with these different light bulbs, right?
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
why
Don't take it
why
too.
you do them. Yeah, you can keep it simple. But obviously, sunlight is the best. But if you have to be inside, you can do things to mitigate. You don't be on Wi-Fi. You can turn that off. You can be just Ethernet. It's not that hard to buy a little cable and plug it in.
Yeah,
And ways to ground, to simulate, being connected to earth. He has a tile opportunity. I do not. I'm in a house with some hardwood. And so I don't love them. I don't think the earthing products are perfect. To go into a ground port, I use it through a green wave, through a ground port, and my bedroom goes through the window and it does go into the ground.
nice work.
There are options and ways you can work these out. Technology is changing our environment, but we are coming up with using technology and coming up with some solutions to help in the modern lifestyle as humans keep getting further and further disconnected from the natural world. But if you can do things to go, like, I don't know, Corey, one day you might be. I used to, when I've done mission trips of adjusting Brazil and Costa Rica and stuff, it's outside. It's been like an open aired kind of things. And in practice for about 10 years, I always wore linen. I looked like I was off a beach. I'm always in linen and always barefoot, literally coming out of my convertible. So I'm as bathed as much sun constantly as I can, sweating as much as I can. And some, patients at one point were like, I don't understand why you are not living on a beach. I'm like, I don't understand either. I don't know why I'm not on an island. Like, I really need to get there. And I used to fantasize about like an island, like I could just practice and, like open air, like barefoot, seeing patients that way would be like heaven, right? And then I moved into, I do a lot of technology. I'm not sure how I would do neurofeedback and all these things that way, but I still think it could be done in the right setting where you only see people when the weather allows. And you could just be kind of having multiple tables, like maybe group acupuncture and group light. I don't know, but wouldn't it feel so? I dream of that day because it is getting, every time I see patients on Zoom, I'm killing myself, right? Like
Right.
every time
Yeah.
I do this, I'm injuring myself. I try as much as I can to do it on my deck. I try to, I got to go for a walk. Now I got to go in the sun. Now I got to change my clothes and get more skin in the game, right? I'm paying a biological price to help people. And it's getting old because I'm getting old.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm like
Yeah,
trying to figure like, I
definitely.
don't want to keep doing it this way, but I want to keep being of service. And I'm like, can I do this outside? Like wouldn't it be awesome?
Yeah, you'll get there. Um, I'm glad that you brought that up. Like, it's my same goal too, obviously. But I have done acupuncture on friends with their feet in the ocean,
Oh,
naked in the sun, and the effects are dramatically different.
dude, I so want to come have you do. I want to come and have that with you, right? Maybe you do like an experiential day, weekend retreat or something. That would be so cool.
That's a good idea. Yeah, we'll do
Yeah.
something like that together at some point for sure.
Yeah, because it's, you got to deal with the weather, right? I told you I was supposed to maybe be in North Carolina this weekend at a water festival of all things. I didn't end up going and it's raining. And I thought, oh, that'd be good because I really don't want to camp in the rain. I am a little bit of a softie, Corey. I'm almost 50. I don't want to be uncomfortable. So I get it when my patients, oh, it's cold. I'm like, I get it. But here, do
Yeah.
you want to have poor brain function, be in pain, have this sleep disorder, think you're mentally ill when you're not? When you
Mm,
just be, you're critically deprived of charged electrons, right?
yeah.
You
Yeah.
just don't have charge and you can't hold a charge. So I find, let me ask you this, because being that you do acupuncture and understand chi flow, electromagnetic, forces moving. Even though some of my techniques are based on meridians, I don't ever do needles in people. Um, I try to explain to people charge, right? And particularly in the brain, I'm dealing with neurofeedback and creating charge. And I think the one thing that psychiatry has kind of done well, believe it or not, is ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, shock therapy. They're on the right track with trying to put charge back in the brain. The problem with the whole semiconductor crystalline, biofield that it is, when someone's so unhealthy, it won't hold that charge. And some people, it'll work and they'll be great. Other people will regress, like you said, because it's not exactly even the behaviors, it's because they don't have good, conducting or capacitor, the semiconductors, it's a mess. So I try to teach this to patients, but I wonder if there's some ways, if you understand what I'm saying, like I'm trying to make it that they can hold the charge, like be able to get a charge, and then I got to keep you be able to hold a charge and to be maintaining, refilling, recharging yourself. And that's kind of how I explain it as I go through things with them. In hearing that, does that make sense to you? Do you think I'm missing something? And how does what you do, I know acupuncture plays into this, but because I don't do it, I don't know if there's a better way I could teach my patients to go get it. And I don't fully understand why acupuncture works as well as it does. I didn't get it until I was about 28 or so, 29. And it was patients who were telling me how relaxing it was. And I had a very hard time understanding how someone sticking a bunch of needles in me would make me feel good, like calm me down. I'm like, how is it possible that I'm covered in a bunch of things? Doesn't it hurt? These are the stories I was telling myself. Mm-hmm. And the very first time, I just passed out. I sleep through it. It's like, good night. And I go into such deep relaxation, deep healing. It's insane. And I haven't had it for a while. Again, things with COVID, everything kind of got a little bit crazy. So I would love if you could touch upon that for people, because I think it's such a beautiful art form. And I know it's not the end all be all. I know all these things go together, but maybe if you could make that make sense to me and to people, like, yeah, this is what I'm doing with charge, and this is how we can do it, and why grounding and being in the sunlight make it be, because you need to start doing that, like on the regular. Like you need to charge your people, not just to your friends. I guarantee you people will line up for it.
Oh, yeah. Well, I like that you brought that up about the deep relaxation. And anyone that's ever had a good acupuncture treatment knows for a fact that as soon as you get several of those needles, if they're in the right indicated points for your specific indication, and you got a good diagnosis, that you immediately start to feel very, very relaxed, and it can actually, you'll start to fall asleep really quickly. Most of my patients do.
Yeah.
And that's because you're really activating parasympathetic nervous system big time, right? So your body is starting to go into all of its regenerative pathways and starting to do a ton of detoxification that it was incapable of doing prior to the treatment, because all of these energetic points were so congested, right? So once you start to activate parasympathetic, you really feel so relaxed. Like a lot of people tell me, oh God, I am so calm and relaxed that I can't do anything for the rest of the day after I get a treatment from you. Why do I feel so tired? And I try to explain, it's not that you feel tired. It's really that you don't know what it's like to feel relaxed, right? Because you're just in a chronic sympathetic fight or flight mode, and you can never allow yourself to go into the rest and digest side that truly is the own body's healing mechanism, right? So it's not so much that we're living a lifestyle that's just making us like we're dying faster, although it is, but it's more so that we're never getting the off switch for that stress to allow for our body to go and do its own repairing that it's designed to do. So there's really nothing on the needle, right? Like, that there's not any kind of medicine there. There's no trickery. It's the activation of the body's own mechanisms that it has within itself to be able to heal itself so
Yeah.
amazingly. And so we're divorced from that in our chronic lifestyle. And I like the fact that you mentioned, that you trade time by doing this, what we're doing, we're trading our own biological time to do that, meaning we're aging faster. And, like you said, also people can get lost in the sauce of thinking like, what are you talking about? Light and grounding and the EMF and the glasses and what do I really do? And you can't do everything at once. You have to just go with the low hanging fruit, find out what makes the most sense to you, and use that in your life, right? And when you understand it, then you can do something else and add that to your repertoire and correct that problem in your life. And don't ever look at it as a huge mountain that you need to climb, because each and every step you take to improve yourself, you're doing laps around the person that's ignoring it and sitting on the couch, right?
What do
So
you think are some of the low hanging fruit that ends up being like kind of consistently where you start with people that works for them?
wearing blue blocking glasses at night is the most underrated thing
Yeah.
that you could possibly do.
Yeah, I agree. I have given away in my practice probably, I would say 200, 300 pair. So because of doing neurofeedback for all the kids, I would go with Uvex, right? The like they're $10
Yeah, I wore them for years.
for, and they're the they're work glasses, so they're the anti-shit kids. So they would get the prize, like this is a special thing. If you're, when the sun goes down, to the parents, like, hey, if you're going to watch anything, you have to be that was the rule, you have to be wearing these glasses, that's how it works. And then I upgraded to like Ducos, because I was getting those for $20 a pair. They scratch pretty easy, but I could give them out. So these would be, yep, everybody gets, here's a free pair of glasses, blah, 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 blah. And, and it became like a thing, and I would get the whole family to do it. And it became the new family culture. And then obviously you can upgrade to things like what we're wearing, raw optics and blue blocks, or, that kind of stuff.
Right?
Which are more, I wasn't buying them all raw optics. I'll tell the truth, but just always had them. Like, you don't have a pair, and if you were a patient in my practice, this is what you got, and this is the way we did it. And it's an easy thing even for parents to explain, like, this is just how it works now.
Yeah.
That's just the new rule. Like, this, our family does this, if you go to church on Sundays, that's what you do. Like, no, everybody wears these blue blocking glasses at night. I agree, that is the easiest. What would be the next low hanging fruit for you?
Oh, the next low hanging fruit would definitely be to spend all of your free time outside. It's more fun out there anyway.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. That's exactly the whole thing. I start with, then I actually move it to the morning, right? You need to start seeing the sunrise within the first.
AM light, yeah, is obviously
That's
more
where I
important.
start. I'm like, okay, we got a new habit. We're going to do this new thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So why is blue blocking glasses really so important, right? It's because if you don't have them on, you're not getting proper pineal excretion of melatonin, which is so underrated, right? Because you need melatonin to activate autophagy and apoptosis to the highest degree. And we know that
Melatonin to me is the greatest brain detoxification agent we have. And I see it as, and that's my main concern, right, is the brain with people. And I just think, I call it darkness deficiency syndrome. I just made it up. I don't know if it's a real thing or not, but like, I think that's what we're suffering from. We're trying
because everything's rooted in yin and yang, and the ancients tried to create that symbol to remind us that we are connected to the laws of nature and they cannot be broken, right? You just have to understand, what did it really mean, right? And it meant a lot of things, but most definitely it's easy to understand that an excessive amount of light, when it's not appropriate, right, in nature is a totally violation of that law, right? So what happens when you live a lifestyle where you're chronically having 16, 17-hour days and you're never adopting the cycle of the seasonality, right? And you never really go into longer nights and you always have long days, you're telling your body that it's perpetual summer, right? So you never really get the appropriate levels of melatonin that you need. We know from the research done on bears that in the late summer, they eat a ton of carbohydrates to the point to where they become diabetic and obese, right? In the long light cycles. Sound familiar to the standard American?
Yeah.
And then they go into hibernation, into the deep cold, into the darkness, where their melatonin levels go up 300-fold.
Yeah.
And when they wake up in the spring, they have bigger muscles than they've had any other time of the year, and they don't have diabetes.
Yeah.
Now, how is that possible when it comes down to the standard framework that we're taught about diet and exercise, right?
Right.
It doesn't correlate to it at all.
Yeah.
So when we're living chronically a lifestyle where we're eating carbohydrates every day of the year, when they're not available, they're not supposed to be available during the wintertime, right? Carbohydrates are only supposed to be available for 3 or 4 months. That's during the summer.
Yeah. And
That's
this is, we're so out of nature, right? About Thanksgiving's about to come, Christmas, New Year's. It's like a carb feast where, that's not natural, right? Like,
right. So we're living a perpetual summer here where humans are creating an environment to where we never experience winter. We never experience night. We never experience the darkness. And with that darkness deficiency that you said, that is regeneration deficiency, right? Because you're not allowing your own environmental programs to work like they're designed to work.
Yeah.
So your body cannot make sense of when and what it needs to do. Right. And like we talked about, like the bear that goes into hibernation, we created a way to have hibernation and deep sleep every single night, right? And when we're not getting that appropriately, that's how we get ill, because over time, chronically, we just have a very stressed and inflammatory response when it comes down to never abstaining from carbohydrates for a period of time when they're not available in the winter, and always having long light cycles during every single day, and not really embracing the darkness like we're supposed to. Not embracing the cold is a lot bigger problem than really people realize. It's not just like that the cold is going to help. It's that not embracing the cold is a bigger problem than you think, because we are designed to freeze our behinds off.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you need that temperature influence to wake up your thyroid. And that's part of the regenerative cycles of nature. Whether we like it or not, that's not up to her. She doesn't really care, right? And it's like you said, like, we're divorced from that concept because of the idea of our comforts, that people aren't comfortable with eating shrimp and seafood. Well, that's too bad. We don't have a solution to that problem, and your comforts are probably what leading you toward demise a lot sooner.
Addiction to comfort is killing us. There's no doubt about it, and it's doing it faster and faster, right? So I love it. Like, actually, you said it, like, who cares? Like, it doesn't matter. I kind of have that same attitude eventually. I'm like, look, it's like, no time for whining. I just, if you want to whine, I'm not for you. Because if at this point, you either want to get on board and get better, and some of the things you're going to do, it's going to take a little discipline. It's going to be a little bit hard-ish, but it really is returning you to your primal ways of being connected to nature. So I love that you talked about. So you guys, the yin and yang, or yin and yang symbol, he's talking about, that little thing with the black and the white. It is a beautiful symbol, and it's very, very ancient, it's been around for a very, very long time. And Taoism is a philosophy that I love from a consciousness standpoint, and how I think things arise, really. And for me, I think, Graham Hancock's talk, I don't know if you're familiar with that TED talk, The War on Consciousness, that TED banned. Have you seen his talk on that?
No, I haven't. I'd like to.
So Graham Hancock, oh, I just love him. He's kind of, an
Great
alternative,
author. Yeah.
anthropologist kind of a thing, right? So archaeologists and stuff like that, archaeologists. And what we're seeing now is a lot, kind of want to last little thing, kind of talk about this in terms of consciousness, because I think the disconnection, I think that regeneration deficiency that you said, I love that, sleep darkness deficiency is really regeneration deficiency. I love it. I'm totally going to steal it. I think people will hear that and understand that. But I also think it's a consciousness and a deficiency, a spiritual growth deficiency, because melatonin not only is, again, to me, we're electromagnetic beings of light, sound, frequency that really are connected to a divine source of everything.
Scientific fact.
Yeah, that comes in, and we are emitting all of the information, and we are receiving the information, and what the quality of what you receive and the quality of how you can process it really affect what you are emitting. Okay, right? And so there can be hiccups throughout all of this, and as you were saying, acupuncture is a way to open up the channels of the way this information is communicating and not getting stuck. Chiropractic does the same thing in a different form. We are releasing basically potential energy to move it into kinetic energy and allow it to transform as it goes along and heal and upgrade you, right? That's the way I always explain it. So melatonin and the pineal gland are deeply, connected to spirituality, consciousness, and transformation of how humans are connected to the spiritual realm. And I love playing in that whole playground. And I don't know if you're familiar with, and we don't fully know, I know there's speculation is figuring out, DMT, and whether it's serotonin, because serotonin becomes melatonin, and serotonin and melatonin get synthesized to DMT. It's we're not exactly sure, but I do know many people who've done darkness retreats. They've gone away, right, and paid for the 10 days to be in pitch black darkness, and they come and bring you, they literally have to figure the whole thing out. And so melatonin goes through the roof, because melatonin is not a nighttime thing per se, it's a darkness thing, you guys. So but night should be dark. So that's why it makes sense. Well, they go off and do these retreats where they're 24-hour darkness, and eventually melatonin is through the roof, and then people start having massive, basically psychedelic experiences akin to mushrooms, acid, ayahuasca, whatever. And I know people who've done all of those things, and they also do this and have massive consciousness upgrade vision journeys because their melatonin got so high, which obviously was then being converted into DMT. So I do think part of the living in perpetual light, living in perpetual day, living in perpetual summer, and not having cold exposure, dark exposure, darkness, and having melatonin, being perpetually low, is keeping us stuck in a spiritual consciousness transformational state, because we aren't able to do what we need to be doing in that way.
Oh, without a doubt.
What do you think about that? Or if you have anything to add, any insights?
Well, I do know that our third eye, or the indigo ray chakra, is connected to your pineal gland. And that is the part of our light body that allows us to have lucid dreaming to the point to where we can actually leave our body and walk through walls and do amazing things that are inconceivable, right, in the physical realm. But when it comes down to it, yeah, pineal activation is truly a deep connection to that source, right? And, if you understand and believe in that sort of thing, then you also know that, there's a one source of consciousness, right, that we're all connected to. But we can divorce ourselves from that connection if we're not within the original form of energy that's programming that source, meaning the sun, right? Like all of our evolutionary consciousness is resorted back to the same ancestral line when it comes down to it. Perceive it as the primordial soup of the original life forms on this planet. And the electrification of those life forms depends on the sun. And light itself doesn't just have, energy. Electromagnetic waves contain energy and information. And the information that's coming from the electric power grid is not the kind of software programming that you want your body to have.
Say more about that. Keep going with that one. I like this.
Yeah, I think that's as much as I could really.
I want to say, okay. Well, but I think that is a great point to way to circle back, to the sun. And sometimes people have a hard time understanding that light and waves and frequency is actually information, right? That waveform, well, is informing. And it's not just, colors. It's not just Roy G. Biv. It's not just the rainbow. It's not just, we say these words, gamma waves and X-rays and things like that. But that you're being told things, you're getting information. And even if you don't understand what that information is at first, your system does.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be really good information, like, salmon roe, or it can be really unhealthy information like Taco Bell.
Totally right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what you're basically saying, that maybe the layperson can be like, I don't really know what they just said. But basically, it can be high quality or it can be junk. One's going to make you better. One's going to make you not.
Right. Yeah. So we're not really I don't really try to tell anyone that they shouldn't be up at night in blue light. Right. I don't tell anyone that they shouldn't go to McDonald's drive-thru. I just want people to understand what they're doing when they're making these types of decisions for themselves and for their family, right? Like what is the biologic effect, and that there most certainly is one, right? And the decision is up to you, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And so whenever you're staying up at night chronically, and you stay up and you're in the artificial light, and you don't sleep to the efficiency that you should be, you're squeezing 2 days into one, and you're hitting the fast forward button on biological time, right? If you're living in 4 summers every year, you're aging 4 times faster. So there's really a difference between chronological age of your body and chronobiological age. And that's why you see women and men now that are 25 years old, and their hormonal levels and their bodies are as if they were 65 years old.
Yeah.
I was one of those people. Luckily, I was able to figure out how to fix that problem. But I do think that I aged myself significantly while I was making all those mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And luckily, our body regenerates a whole lot faster than it took to do it. I keep telling people, I'm like, ultimately, because everybody wants to be better in like a week, it seems at times. I was like, here's the thing. You've been sick, fat, and tired for 20 years. I would think you would at least give your body, to be fair, it should take 20 years to get better.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky for you, it doesn't work that way. But it's certainly not going to happen in 3 days. So, I try to, like, you guys, like, give it a second, because a lot of people get impatient and try to explain that. But yeah, you can reverse age. You can stop it. If maybe we just ended on giving people some hope to understand, you're looking at two people who are still getting better, right, in making choices. And again, we are living lives full of technology. Yet neither one of us is off in the woods, grounded all the time, under no artificial lights whatsoever.
And I've tried that. Trust me, it's not all of what you think it might be too. There's a middle way. That's why I love that you bring that up, because we have a middle way where we can create a balance out of nature and technology. And that's the important balance that we all need to find out, what's right for us, and the real point of optimal light that I spend so much time trying to teach people, what I've been able to learn is that preventative medicine is by far the key, because you never want to let yourself get to the point to where you're sick, because then you have to go way harder, right?
Yeah.
And once you're sick, you have to literally do everything. Like blue blocking glasses wouldn't even be enough. You'd have to just sit there in the dark to hope that you can have appropriate hormonal cycles to reclaim the situation, And as long as you do all of the things that you can stave off disease for a lot longer. Every decision that we make is either giving us more biologic time, or it's taking away the precious time that we actually have, right? And whether that be, toward our ultimate lifespan, our life expectancy, or fast forwarding toward disease, both of them are essentially the same concept, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's what it is. Little things add up. Small hinges swing open really big doors, you guys. And believe it or not, you find the right hinges that have the most kind of like impact, return on investment, whoever it is. And that is different for everybody. But there's a few things that are kind of universal, right? As we talked about some universal things. I mean, the sun is good for all the people, DHA, good for all the people, right? But you might want to be dialing those in, working with an experienced clinician who can help you figure out that. And so, Corey, on that note, why don't you tell them how to get in contact with you, how to come see you if they were like, oh yeah, I want him to help me find what those hinges are. They're going to swing open that door for me.
Yeah, you can follow me on all forms of media, Optimal Light Doc. And you can go to my website, optimallight.net. And you can contact me on any of those platforms. You can also follow me on Patreon. I have a blog series on there as well.
Awesome. Well, I got to get on board with the whole Patreon thing. I just,
oh yeah,
I only did it for one person, for Cruz. That was the only person I ever jumped over there for, but I was with him in the old school membership thing. Mm-hmm. With all of that a long time ago. But yeah,
really? That's cool.
Oh yeah, probably 6-7 years ago is when.
Oh yeah, that was the prime movement.
Yeah, and it was very new, and he was super involved in all the things, right? But it's all a little bit different now. I haven't really gotten on board with all the new where everything is, but yeah, Patreon is I gotta figure it out. So yeah, I'll check you out over there.
Please do. Yeah, I appreciate talking with you today.
You too, Corey. Thank you for y'all can send some love, put some energy toward us for poisoning ourselves for your educational benefit. And
we're not dying as fast as anyone else.
Right, if they're not looking like this
on a cell phone, or if you're not wearing the blue blocking glasses.
Yeah.
Right.
And I avoid the headphones as much as possible. I don't wear those either. I interview people say, I'm like, no, I don't want a pair. I'm not putting that into my brain.
No, yeah, you don't want to increase any inflammation toward your most vital organ.
Yeah. I heard you talking about how, so melanopsin is in the eye, and that's what's detecting blue light. But if the lights are on in your house above versus on the ground, it's different. It affects you differently. And this is something I didn't understand. So can you explain that to me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I have these red lights on just for this particular situation, and it's during the day right now. But when I'm by myself at home, I really don't have any of this stuff on. Actually, I have the breakers cut. But the way that melanopsin is structured in the eye, which melanopsin is the blue light detector, right, in our eye and tissues. Most of it is actually directly in the back of your eye and actually at the bottom of your eye, meaning it's receiving its signals from light that's coming directly from the front and the light that's coming directly from above, right? So you have two different parts of your eye. You have the eye pathways, optical pathway that goes, to the occipital lobe where we perceive our environment. But our eyes have another purpose, which is the energetic pathway, and that's always telling our brain what time it is. The energetic pathway goes directly to the hypothalamus, and to be able to get there, it goes through something called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is always telling your brain what time it is. So when there's light going in your eyes, it's activating, and most specifically blue light more than anything else. You're telling your, you have the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. You're telling your pituitary gland to become active, right? And the most dominant hormone of activity is cortisol. Cortisol and melatonin are on an axis, meaning they antagonize each other when one or more is active. So you can never have adequate melatonin when you have activation of cortisol, and the vice versa, right? And that's the way that the night and dark cycle is designed to work when you have proper programming. So when you have lights on, even if they're red lights inside your house, you're better off putting them down at the ground or next to you, because they're much less likely to be able to register as far as circadian timing is concerned. So it's really important to know. That's why when I'm up at night, I'm actually using a red headlamp, which is allowing the light to be emitted away from my eyes, right? And not so much coming directly at them and from above. And I tend to keep all the lights off as far as, in the sockets and stuff like that.
Yeah. And it makes total sense when you think about it in terms of how we've evolved for a million years using fire on the ground.
Fire on the ground.
It was in the pit, which makes total oh, duh. And I happen to just have kind of done it by accident because I like the way it looks, where I have light bulbs, just incandescent, clipped, real cheap ghetto in the corner on I have lamps. I don't like overhead lights at all, but I know lamps are still over, but I don't like ceiling lights at anywhere at all. But I have light that shines up from the ground in corners around my house. It put a little glow on, and it really, I'm like, and I get a little bit oh, make sure all the lights are off and it's all got to be red. But actually, it may not be as big of a deal. And I did not know this. So it's a nice little hack kind of to teach people all right, well, those.
It's not the only thing that's important when it comes to, excuse me, with the axis, right? Melatonin and vitamin D also work on an axis as well. So, the activation of vitamin D is strong solar light, UVB, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the activation of melatonin is the absence of light, strong darkness, right?
Right.
And it seems like we have enough information to know that each one of those receptors are deactivated by the opposing effect too, meaning to be able to turn the vitamin D receptor back off, you also need the darkness. Just the same way to turn melatonin off, you also need the light, right? So that's so important whenever we know of people that tend to pay attention to their getting a ton of sun, right? Because I've heard recently that people with the movement, people have a lot of sun, but I'm not getting enough vitamin D. Well, you need to know that tells me that your environment's not really probably what it should be, because non-native EMF will suppress your melatonin the same way that artificial light will. And you're probably spending too much time in light at night when you should be embracing darkness, because you're not getting the recyclical fashion and appropriate programming for that receptor, right, to get turned off. So people think, because we live in a paradigm where everything is cause and effect, or one issue, right, that we're trying to pay attention to, like, for example, vitamin D. But it's not just the levels of hormones that are what are important. We think that it is because we're always trying to add something in. We think, well, if we're deficient in zinc, add some supplement in. If we're deficient in melatonin, I'm going to take it. I don't care what Corey says. Or if I'm going to take vitamin D. Nowhere near the same thing if the receptor is not being programmed to actually receive. So why is taking vitamin D a lot bigger of a problem than people think? Well, it ain't the same thing because it doesn't achieve appropriate reception. Whenever you take it, it's getting activated by these fat transporters, right? You have these lipoproteins that are non-specific transporters that doesn't allow it to actually get to the receptor to where it can actually do its work. And whenever you get UVB exposure and strong solar light while you're naked outside in the middle of the day, that allows for that hormone to get transported by specific binding transport straight to the receptor, and it works like it's supposed to. So what is taking a supplement version of vitamin D really like? It's kind of like the quarterback of a football team hiking the ball with his eyes closed and just chunking the ball out there on the field and hoping that the receiver that's supposed to get the ball actually catches it, right? Not going to work. It's kind of like if I have all these plants I have in my garden back here, if all I do is just turn the hose on and I have no idea what direction the hose is facing, and it's just turning it on and thinking that all these plants are going to get water, it's probably not going to work like that, right? Yeah. And it's a lot more complex in the human body.
Yeah. It is tough. So if anybody was confused by that, it's okay. You can reach out to Corey or reach out to me and we can further work with you. But I love the D-melatonin kind of connections. I do explain that in my immune course where I'm kind of going over with people like, well, let's talk about this. And people always, well, what about the people in the north, in Norway and Sweden, and they don't have any sun? I'm like, okay, D and melatonin are different. They're also in the dark. They used to be. And I'm telling you, with what they're, obviously they're eating cold water fish, they're eating things that have a lot of D in them. But melatonin, I've always said, I think, people with the super high melatonin, their D levels can be much lower because of the way it works together.
Totally, yeah.
Part of why they're sick now is because they're not in darkness anymore, like they're missing it because we're living disconnected, so yeah. Anyway, thank you for answering that question for me and offering some more info.